Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Ollie Barrett in London, and these are the headlines. Incessant Russian bombing has turned Ukraine's Donbas region into hell, according to President Zelensky, as the trial of a Russian soldier for war crimes nears its climax. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu says Moscow is close to gaining full control of the separatist region of Lugansk in eastern Ukraine. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak becomes the first high-profile British politician to enter the Sunday Times Rich list this weeks after his family's tax arrangements attracted controversy and amid a cost of living crisis. Beijing hits out at Canada for banning telecom giants Huawei and ZTE from Canadian 5G networks, calling Ottawa's concerns over security risks groundless and warning of retribution. Australia and France report their first cases of monkeypox, joining a number of European and North American nations detecting the disease, which is endemic in parts of Africa. Elon Musk rejects allegations that he groped and exposed himself to a flight attendant 6 years ago. The world's wealthiest person calls the accusation utterly untrue. Russian forces have bombarded areas of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region from land and air. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Russians have completely destroyed the area. He's accusing Russia of genocide.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue advancing to liberate the Kharkiv region, but in Donbas the occupiers are trying to exert even more pressure. It is hell there, and it is not an exaggeration. The brutal and absolutely senseless bombardment of Severodonetsk, there were 12 killed and dozens wounded in just one day. The bombardment and shelling of other cities, air and missile strikes by the Russian army, all this is not just fighting during the war. Russian strikes on the Chernihiv region, particularly the terrible attack on Desna. The removal of debris is ongoing there, many killed. Constant strikes on the Odessa region and on the cities of central Ukraine. Donbas is completely destroyed. All this has no and cannot have any military explanation for Russia. This is a deliberate and criminal attempt to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, destroy as many houses, social facilities and enterprises as possible. This is what will qualify as the genocide of the Ukrainian people, and for which the occupiers will definitely be brought to justice.
Russian shelling in the Lugansk area has killed 13 civilians in the last 24 hours. Russia's forces have pushed forward and taken more ground, but Ukraine has its own artillery and is firing back. What is not clear is how many of their modern howitzers have managed to reach the battlefields in the east. Meanwhile, nearly 1,700 Ukrainian soldiers are reported to be taken to a Russian prison yard in Donetsk region. According to Russian figures, they surrendered at the Azovstal steel plant. Russian state TVs released videos of Ukrainian soldiers in hospital. It claims these fighters who were at the Azovstal steel plant are receiving treatment in Donetsk region. Ukraine says there are still hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers inside the besieged steel plant. And the deputy commander of Azov regiment has released a video saying the fight is still going.
Glory to Ukraine. Today is the 75th day of war. Me and the other commanding officers remain on the territory of the Azovstal plant. A certain operation is going on, the details of which I will not disclose. Thanks to the whole world and thanks to Ukraine for support. we will see each other.
Well, let's go to our correspondent Chris Jones, who's joining us live now from Riga. And Chris, it does look like Russia is ramping up the pressure in the east of Ukraine, especially in the Donbas region. What's the latest you can bring us?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we heard it there. The President Zelensky had addressed the nation in a video address and described the Donbas as hell. We've also seen more shelling in the area of Lugansk. 13 civilians are judged to have died because of that shelling. Also in that address, we heard Zelensky say that there have been constant strikes on the Odessa region, on the cities of central Ukraine, and the Donbas is completely destroyed. Now, many of these people in these areas, in Severodonetsk, in Lugansk, and also Mariupol, have been left without drinking water, without any real food supply for several weeks and months. They've also been trapped in their basements because of that fear of the constant shelling that has been taking place in the east. Now, Zelensky also said that there is an increased pressure coming from Russian troops in the east as they move to try and take more parts of that area. However, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence, that might be a slightly rash move. They say that they are low on morale because of key defeats in areas such as Kyiv and Kharkiv, and also that they're low on supplies because of the length of time it's taken them to take areas like Mariupol. So it says if they are to push forward effectively and efficiently, they will have to stop and regroup and resupply. The Ministry of Defence also does say, though, that commanders are unlikely to do that. They want to show the Kremlin that they are capable of taking key military objectives. And so it seems as though the war in the east of Ukraine is very much going to ramp up in the next coming days, weeks and months.
OK, Chris. And Ukraine is, of course, a huge global exporter of wheat and sunflower oil, and since the Russian invasion it hasn't been able to export those items properly. What are the implications of that, and are we about to see a global food crisis as a result?
Well, I think we are on the verge of a global food crisis. As it stands, the UN says that combined Russia and Ukraine provide around about a quarter of the world's wheat and around about 60% of the world's sunflower oil. The UN also says that there are around about 36 countries spanning in different continents that rely on these types of supplies from Ukraine and Russia. And it also says that food prices have gone up by about 30% since this time last year because of the Russian invasion. And all of this has really been brought about mostly because of that annexation of the Black Sea. Russia has taken a lot of control of those key ports in that area, which is a key export route for Ukraine to get things like sunflower oil and wheat out of the country. And US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he said at a UN meeting that the food supply for millions of Ukrainians and millions more across the world has quite literally been held hostage by the Russian military. Now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that he's in talks with the Kremlin to try and alleviate some of those supplies and get them out so that the world can avoid famine in certain places. But Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has come out and said that unless the West removes some of its, and he describes them as insane economic sanctions, then their standpoint is not likely to change anytime soon.
Thanks, Chris. A Russian soldier has now apologised in court in Kiev to the widow of a man who was killed in a northeastern Ukrainian village. The soldier on trial is Vadim Shishimarin, a Russian tank commander. He's pleaded guilty for killing a civilian in cold blood. He says he wasn't obliged to follow any order that amounted to a war crime, but claims another soldier put pressure on him to carry out the killing.
Ти розкарбуєшся у судовому злочині?
Да. Я признаю вину, А я понимаю, потому что вы не сможете меня простить, я прошу прощения за все, что я делал. Составили колонну и из 5 машин. 2 БРМ.
Ukrainian prosecutors have requested a life sentence after the accused soldier admitted guilt.
Виновным, как я уже говорил, себя признал, он прочитал обвинительный акт, согласился с с тем, что там изложено, но опять же человек, который не понимает юридических тонкостей или каких-то определенных правил квалификации каких-то статей, он может сказать, что да, это все так и было, но, как я уже говорил, у меня есть определенные возражения к тому, что там изложено.
Meanwhile, Moscow has denied having any information about the ongoing trial and says the lack of a diplomatic mission in Ukraine has limited its ability to provide assistance. The Kremlin continues to deny targeting any civilians in Ukraine and accuses Kiev of staging war crimes. The US Senate has approved a $40 billion emergency aid package to Ukraine. The papers have been sent to South Korea for the president to sign. Before heading to Asia, Joe Biden hosted the leaders of Finland and Sweden at the White House and offered his support for their NATO bids.
Finland and Sweden make NATO stronger.
At a meeting at the White House with the leaders of Finland and Sweden, U.S. President Joe Biden offered his unequivocal support for their efforts to join NATO.
They meet every NATO requirement, and then some.
Sweden and Finland are seeking membership after decades of standing outside the Cold War-era military alliance designed to deter threats from the Soviet Union, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine has heightened security concerns and changed the equation. Biden, who has rallied the West to stand up to Russia, on Thursday stressed NATO's importance as a defensive alliance.
So let me be clear. New members joining NATO is not a threat to any nation.
But Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has expressed strong opposition to the Nordic countries' inclusion.
We have told allies that we will say no to Finland and Sweden's NATO membership.
Turkey, a NATO member, has accused both nations of harboring Kurdish militants it considers terrorists and supplying them with weapons. Finland's president on Thursday vowed his country would commit to the security of Turkey, and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said conversations among Finland, Sweden, and Turkey were underway.
And I'm confident that we will come to a quick decision to welcome both Sweden and Finland to join the NATO family.
All 30 NATO nations must approve any new members.
A team of US politicians is heading to Europe to try and calm tensions over the Northern Ireland post-Brexit protocol. The group of 9 representatives from both the Democratic and Republican parties kicks off a 6-day trip to Brussels, Dublin, London and Belfast. They'll be in London tomorrow for a series of meetings with the Foreign Minister, the Trade Secretary, the Labour leader and the Shadow International Trade Secretary. The US acts as a co-guarantor of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement between the British and Irish governments on how Northern Ireland should be governed. Ahead of the visit, the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi warned against altering the Northern Ireland Protocol. Pelosi took to Twitter to announce that the US Congress will not support its free trade agreement with the UK or hopes for one if the Good Friday Accord is undermined. The UK government says the protocol itself is undermining the Good Friday Agreement and must be changed. Australians will head to the polls on Saturday in a national election. Prime Minister Scott Morrison's Conservative Liberal coalition is seeking a 4th straight term. The Labour Party's aiming for a return to power after 9 years in opposition.
The ambassador, but we understand them and we respect them and we understand the deep disappointment that the contract that we had to build the attack.
Opinion polls show the Labour Party headed by Anthony Albanese leading, followed by the incumbent Prime Minister, but that gap has narrowed in the final weeks of campaigning. The House of Representatives has 151 seats. All are up for grabs and 76 are needed to form a government. The Senate has 76 seats. 40 are up for election this time around. Key issues in the election have been inflation, which is at a 2-decade high in Australia, gender equality and climate change. Australia has a compulsory voting system, and over 6.5 million postal votes out of 17 million have already been cast. A number of international schools in China are facing a drop in foreign student enrolment. At the same time, there have been mass resignations by international teachers.
International schools in China are facing an exodus of foreign teachers and students, with some in the industry saying certain schools will not survive Beijing's pursuit of COVID-0. Travel curbs, lockdowns and increased regulation are all contributing to the woes of the sector. About 40% of teachers are expected to leave mainland jobs this year, up from 30% last year and 15% before the pandemic. Alexa Moss is the head of early learning at an international school in Guangzhou. She says they are struggling to replace the teachers who are leaving.
Now that we're in the 2022 recruiting season, what we're finding a new pattern emerging of teachers and leadership and basically all constituents in international schools are choosing to leave China. So that candidate pool within the country has shrunk. So it's harder to recruit within China and it's hard to recruit outside of China. So that finding quality staff has just been really tricky, particularly in this recruiting cycle.
International schools can be lucrative business, with fees sometimes exceeding $44,000 a year. They are seen by middle-class Chinese parents as a way of improving their child's chances of winning a place at a top global university. But in recent years, some have avoided emigrating as China was largely free of COVID. Now, as the country faces a resurgence of the virus, foreign families are choosing to return to their homes, and others have put off moving to China altogether. Tom Olmert is Executive Director of the Association of China and Mongolia International Schools.
Many heads have told me that they have been spending up to 300 hours or more trying to recruit teachers to come to China. But now people around the world have been reading about the lockdowns and just don't feel a need to subject themselves to that. So they take jobs elsewhere.
On top of this, Beijing has moved to limit foreign influence in the education system. This has meant that some schools have had to grapple with changing regulations. Recently, a Beijing school affiliated with the English public school Harrow was forced to drop its famous brand name, and London's Westminster School has dropped a plan for schools around China.
A man nicknamed the Russian Hulk has set a new world record by towing 3 helicopters simultaneously, without any specialised devices or help. Now, on to the Hollywood defamation trial, and Johnny Depp's ex-girlfriend and former associates have testified in court, recounting their experiences with the actor.
Did you become aware that he drank to excess?
I was always aware.
Okay, and can you explain how you were aware of that?
He was drunk all the time, a lot of the time.
With respect to any of that, hallucinogenics, cocaine or marijuana, did he do any of that in your presence?
Yes.
More than once?
All the time.
When you say all the time, how many times, again, in the period that you were both first friends and then sexual with Mr. Depp, do you think you saw him?
I couldn't even tell you. I mean, I just know he was always drinking or smoking a joint.
But would it be fair to say more than at least dozens of times?
Yeah. Over the full course, oh yeah. Mr. Depp threw a wine bottle across the room, the hotel room on one instance in Las Vegas while we were shooting Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Was something about to happen?
A fight was going on.
Between you and Mr. Depp?
No.
Who was the fight between?
Between Johnny Depp and his friends in the room, the assistant. Honestly, I don't remember.
And the bottle do you remember sitting here today, Ms. Barkin, whether the bottle was full of wine or empty?
I don't.
Sitting here today, Ms. Barkin, do you remember whether the bottle hit you?
No, it did not.
Did the bottle hit anyone else?
No, it did not.
Approximately how far away from you was Mr. Depp when he threw the bottle?
Across the rooms.
What did he say that indicated to you that he was jealous?
He's just a jealous man, controlling. Where are you going? Who are you going with? What did you do last night? I had a scratch on my back once that got him very, very angry because he insisted it came from me having sex with a person who wasn't him.
During the time that you were in a sexual relationship with Mr. Depp, was it common for him to say things to you about being controlling, to use your words, or being jealous of you?
Yeah, very common.
And in these instances, when Mr. Depp became jealous or controlling, did he also become angry?
Yeah, and demanding.
Well, initially, crews loved him because he was always so great with the crew, but crews don't love sitting around for hours and hours and hours waiting for the star of the movie to show up. And it also got around town. I mean, people talk. It's a small community. And it made people reluctant to use him.
So Mr. Depp came in and said, I want you to get $20 million for me?
Actually, it was, I want you to give me $20 million. It was not discussed. The question was not asked as a loan.
What did the bruise that you saw in Amber look like?
I mean, it looked similar to that, but it didn't look like it looked like a grab, not a punch. Like just somebody grabbed her arm.
Well, it was a glitzy premiere night for the latest Top Gun movie, and the British royalty joined the Hollywood actor Tom Cruise on the red carpet in London. We will leave you with that. Thanks for watching. You can, of course, be my wingman anytime.
many other...
This is right, Arab.